What news stories mattered most this week in the world of media and advertising? Today, we will try to answer that question in 20 minutes or less. I'm Jack Benjamin.
And I'm Ella Sagar.
We're reporters for The Media Leader, and this week we'll be covering the latest earnings from Alphabet, Spotify, Netflix, and others, an odd match for Teads and Outbrain, and more. But first, Ella, what would you characterize as the biggest news story of the past week?
I think based on my LinkedIn feed, it's got to be Google reversing its deprecation of third-party cookies. I think, whether or not it was a surprise depends on maybe what part of the industry you're working in, but it did come as quite a surprise and just a big story over all of the publications and all of the social media that I'm looking at.
Yeah, it was definitely a sudden shock, let's say. Even if it wasn't a surprise, it was, it came, the news sort of just came out and in a blog post, and suddenly plans had to be torn up, it seemed like. So I did cover this story for us. It can't be understated that this is really a huge deal. Google is the biggest digital ad player, and third-party cookies play a major role in the digital ecosystem. And it's about face for them. Google had for years wanted to deprecate cookies, as you noted, and I think this change sort of comes because their own post-cookie solution, the privacy sandbox, was being viewed as anti-competitive, potentially illegal. Movement for an open web has gotten to take some credit here. I spoke with their co-founder, James Rosewell, yesterday, and they were the first and loudest voice highlighting Google's sort of monopolistic types of attempts, or at least that's what they accused them of. And Google clearly couldn't come up with an alternative solution that was going to get past competition markets authorities. And so it's decided to actually keep the cookie. And it's still going to be working on its privacy sandbox.
Yeah, this is what confused me a little bit, because the privacy sandbox is still going to exist, but it's unclear what role that's going to play. And obviously you write on publishing, and a lot of the publishers already have been developing first party data solutions and more privacy safe targeting. And but I do think so you wonder, does that mean that everyone just downs tools and stops doing that because they can use third party cookies? And do you know what I mean?
Yeah. So yes, that was my initial question as well. And the response I got was, actually, we need to continue sort of moving away from the cookie. And that's for a variety of reasons. I think a lot of people don't like cookies. I have some good quotes, actually. Reese Cater, who's the chief solutions officer for data and tech at Presys, said that this announcement is an unwelcome development that shows just how dysfunctional and indecisive the modern online advertising industry has become. Third-party cookies were never designed for online advertising. They are a convenient fudge solution to an industry that grew up quickly and with little oversight, and have never worked as robustly and comprehensively as some people like to pretend. In Apple's ecosystems, they are already effectively dead. It's ludicrous that the industry is clinging on to this technology rather than developing more modern solutions that are fit for purpose and built for the needs of advertisers and user privacy alike, end quote. So that was just one flavor. And that was that was maybe the strongest worded response I received in reaction to the news. But it's clear that a lot of the industry's leaders are ready to move beyond the cookie. There's a whole cottage industry of different solutions that have popped up. And as you mentioned, publishers are also working together on first-party data solutions. Talking with James at Movement for an Open Web, he suggested that publishers maybe start working together a little bit more cooperatively on that, because first-party data really works well at scale. And so if you're a smaller publisher, great, you can collect first-party data, but how useful is that to advertisers? It's not necessarily clear unless it's at, maybe you're partnering with other publishers.
Yeah. And when you have clean rooms, data matching, that you see in retail media quite a lot with, big retailers, Tesco have their own media and insight platform with dunnhumby and but it's only worth anything if that advertiser comes with their own first party data to kind of overlay everything. And so that is quite interesting when it does come to first-party data solutions to bear in mind. And that's something we're going to be talking about at the Future of Media a lot.
Yes, in October.
In October, that's going to be a big focus. It's almost like we predicted this might happen.
Well, people that were tuned in thought that this might happen. And that's definitely true. And to to be fair, Google is working on new solutions. Mentioned that the privacy sandbox, I guess, is going ahead, but we don't really know what's going on.
I guess it's the competition and markets authority. And I think that's why one of the reasons that it had been delayed in the past was the pandemic, and then it was competition regulation and that sort of thing. So there is, I think after delay, after delay, after delay, I think it's punctuated my whole time at the media leader since 2021. So but so now that this is a kind of a reversal and elevating user choice.
Yes. So this was the other solution.
How they're sort of pivoting.
Yes. So when a user logs into Chrome, they can decide if they want to opt out to cookies across the entire web rather than on each individual website, which sounds user-friendly. But it's not clear exactly what this is going to look like. And users can obviously change this in settings whenever they want. But Movement for an Open Web apparently is already looking to potentially challenge this because they believe it shouldn't be the browser's decision to take away cookies or not. It should really be individual organizations to say, I don't want to use cookies, or I do want to use cookies. So we'll see if that gets through competition authorities as well. And that's separate, obviously, to the fact that it would probably be better for user privacy. But the end result would still be probably more users opting out, which wouldn't be so good for advertisers. So there is this sort of push to just sort of move beyond the cookie still in the industry, and we'll have to keep an eye on
making that like reject all as easy as accept all. And I think that cookie acceptance is at a record low. So it's how useful is a cookie if it's mostly being rejected.
And it's also not on it's not on Apple Safari. It's not on Firefox. This is really just a Chrome thing that cookies are still on. So there's a strong argument to be made that, you shouldn't really be looking at cookies anyway, because then you're not accessing, a huge part of the market. And that's without all the people that are choosing to opt out cookies anyway on Chrome. So we'll keep an eye on this, obviously, as the year goes on, but this was definitely major news. And it came just before Alphabet's earnings.
Very interesting timing. Yeah. And they were, a lot of the talk that I'd seen before Alphabet was trying to figure out how much AI and Gemini would influence its earnings, because I think that it has been caught a bit on the back foot in terms of AI. And so, but its revenue was up 14% year on year, and it was driven by growth in search and cloud. And they did specifically say that they were into innovating AI in all parts of their business. So
they said some nice things about AI search, but they didn't, I haven't seen a whole lot of strong figures necessarily that they released, certainly not in the earnings call transcript. But
so it's kind of strong language, but not necessarily like no new products or anything like that. And I think in the ad revenue was at $64.62 billion, which was up from $58.14 billion last year. So, ad revenue is still strong.
And YouTube also grew revenue compared to last year. I think looking forward, we're looking potentially at Google sort of lapping itself when there was a return to growth in the second half of last year. And so these growth figures, 14% is a big figure for a huge company like this, but it's also based on a relatively low point of comparison from Q2 of last year. So whether or not Google will be able to continue seeing those really strong growth numbers, I think will depend on if it can accelerate some things into the latter half of this year. There were a whole lot of other major Q2 earnings released in the past week, and I was curious, Ella, what other people should be aware of?
Yeah, so we've got Netflix came out last Friday, so it posted 16.8% revenue growth. That's its highest since Q2 of 2021, but it's also got its ad tier revenue now, and so that grew 34% quarter on quarter, and it said it accounted for 45% of all new signups. So that's pretty significant growth for the ad tier. But its ad chief, Peter Naylor, has just left the company. So that happened, I think, the day before. Jeremy Gorman, who was preceding to Peter Naylor, both of whom have spoken at the Future of TV Advertising Global in successive years. She's also left as well. So it seems like there's uncertainty about what's going on there.
There's definitely a lot of turnover at that position. I'm curious as well about the subscriber issue, because it didn't seem like forward guidance on subscription growth was necessarily positive, and Netflix is not going to be reporting subscription numbers beginning next year. So how does that sort of reflect on the business?
I think that was announced maybe a last quarter that they wouldn't be reporting user growth. And that's been a big kind of, for investors, one of their main metrics is, and that they would judge, and a subscription company like Netflix on. But they are going to be looking Netflix to not report on user growth and instead focus on financial growth metrics, so the profitability and that focus. And you do see that with some other subscription companies where they really want to focus on like the EBITDA and the profitability of a company rather than necessarily subscriber numbers, which can fluctuate quite a lot depending on seasonality and other elements as well.
Is that just because now the ad tier is making up a larger and larger part of their revenue? They feel like, if for the longest time, if you're a subscription company, it's basically the amount of revenue you can generate is the amount of subscribers and the price that you're charging them. But now that you have an ad tier, you're also getting in this extra ad revenue, and so they feel like
they might want to
shift away
from an acquisition to a kind of more consolidation and retention, and focusing on upping the average revenue per user is a big metric for them rather than new acquisitions, because you might have someone who's not on an ad tier who drops down to an ad tier. They wouldn't count as a new subscriber. But they are potentially making more average revenue because they're, engaging with the advertising on the platform. And the other element was that Barb will be reporting on its ad tier in the UK in September. So I think they're wanting to be more transparent, and they're kind of getting into that advertising and figuring out the mechanics of how that all works, which is a very complicated business, as we both know.
Well, you need to be more transparent if you're going to be trying to compete against, more traditional broadcasters, right? For some of that linear and streaming TV budget money. Speaking of another streamer, Spotify also released their latest earnings, and you'd reported from the earnings call that Spotify is looking into more tailored subscription offerings, including an ultra premium tier. I mean, what a name for a
ultra
new
premium
tier.
I think Daniel Ek also described it as a sort of deluxe version of Spotify. So you'd get higher quality experience, and it would be the rough price point that he kind of gave was $17 to $18. So significantly more expensive than the, I don't know how you could say this, like the standard premium or just the normal premium.
Is there going to be a super mega ultra substantial deluxe premium tier coming?
I don't know, but I mean, maybe this is the start, but I think he was talking about a lot that previously what has worked really well for them is a one size fits all. Like you're either on the basic tier or the premium tier. So you get unlimited music or you get unlimited music with ads. And those are pretty easy to understand. But as it's grown and it's now surpassed, I think it's 243 million subscribers, there are so many subscribers within that have different content needs, different use cases. And so they've introduced what has been working really well for them, and how that actually, he said their subscription has performed better than they thought, was introducing all of these different plans, like the duo plan, the family plan, the student plan, the mini plan. And so I think they're just going to look into that. And a few of the investors on the call I was on yesterday were saying, is there really a need for this? And then they said, well, within the user base that we have, we think that people would want this. And that it's now one of the biggest subscription businesses in the world, that we've got to start offering different content offerings, different subscription offerings, and change from a kind of one size fits all to more tailored. And that's their kind of what they're going to be driving for success.
Interesting. And then you can charge more for it. It's sort of like the opposite model to Netflix, which didn't start with ads and is now going into ads, and they're still upping the prices on both those because they want to increase revenue, but they haven't actually added value. They've actually arguably made the product worse in the sense of, well, now you're still paying you're paying less, but still a large amount for the ad experience. Whereas with Spotify, they've added more value, it sounds like, to the user
that was
experience,
a big
and
thing
then have decided to charge more.
That Ek was talking about was that you can only, and they've done quite a few two consecutive price increases in the last 12 months, and in the US, which is their biggest market, and they've seen a lot less churn than the previous price increase, which was already quite low. And so because of the value that they're bringing, the unlimited music, but they've also differentiated themselves with also having podcasts and also having audiobooks, and they're now bringing in more video content. So they're trying to bring more things to it to justify that price increase.
Right.
In a consumer's mind.
it was also reported that Warner Brothers Discovery is discussing splitting up its business, and that has to do with streaming, correct?
Yes. It's streaming business. It's launching Max in Europe, and it's got that is the more profitable, or kind of the better the part of the business that's actually growing. Yeah, exactly. Maybe not profitable, but growing. It's also got movie studio and linear networks, but it's, as you've reported in the past, it's got a huge amount of debt after Warner Media merged with Discovery, and to try and address that, what they're looking at is potentially selling assets or splitting its movie studio and combining it with the streaming, and then leaving the debt with the kind of the linear TV assets, and then trying to figure out how that would look. And they've been in talks with Paramount about merging earlier this year. There's obviously they're looking for streaming. Other Paramount also looking for streaming partners. So I think in that market, Warner is involved in a lot of these different conversations. And so, if you've got $43.2 billion of debt, you've got to try and figure out how you make that more manageable. They've already repaid $1 billion in the last quarter, but it's just quite a difficult one when the interest rates, inflation's high. And so this is a potential option, and it would make sense for streaming to be separate from linear.
It's interesting keeping an eye on all of these different streaming businesses. Warner's got this sort of traditional part of the business that it's still attached to, and that's perhaps being a drag on some growth. But at the same time, the streaming business isn't profitable. Netflix is doing much better, but also clearly running into the wall with subscriber growth. I'm sure Warner Brothers Discovery is hitting a similar wall, and that's why it's launching in other territories. And meanwhile, Spotify, that's, it's sort of in a different situation, still growing and adding more value to try and keep growing and to improve price sensitivity, essentially, or decrease price sensitivity. One final big story that we've been following this past week, and I should note there's going to be lots more earnings coming later on this week, and we'll talk about those next week. That include ITV, JCDecaux, IPG, Havas, and Acast. But one big story that we've been following this week is also, it's not about a splitting, but about a merger between Teads and Outbrain. And this was reported on by Business Insider, that those talks to merge are at an advanced stage. Both companies declined to comment when we approached them for comment. But isn't this sort of a really weird match between these two companies?
Yeah, when I was looking into this, and I think Outbrain, content recommendation company, they were named in a roundtable for that our editor-in-chief Omar reported on in context of the Forbesgate scandal, where there was kind of a spoof website, www3 Forbes.com, and a lot of the advertising money and was being directed there, and so but not being seen really by anyone, and it was all very dodgy, and it's a kind of made for advertising site. So Outbrain was cited as one of those that was kind of recommending www3 Forbes.com as that site. Right. And so in contrast, Teads has taken a 100% MFA-free inventory stance on its global media network. So you just wonder how this is being discussed in private. And but we do know that Altis, the French company that owns Teads, has been looking for to sell, and I think its price point was about $2 to $3 billion, which might now have dropped in reports that I've seen to about $1 billion.
And it's important to note that Outbrain's sort of been suffering from some declining revenue growth. So an acquisition could be positive, at least it would be inorganic growth for that company. So yeah, definitely something to keep an eye on. Definitely a big story, and definitely a weird match. There were, even though we've gone through so much news, there were a number of additional stories this week that we won't be able to get to in as much detail. So Ella, what else should people be aware of?
So in true newsreader style, in agency news, Publicis Groupe posted stronger than expected organic growth of 5.6% in its Q2 earnings, along with a solid performance across all regions. Meanwhile, Vivendi, the parent group of Havas, Canal Plus and Lagardère Publishing, has announced plans to list each arm of its business on different stock exchanges. In social news, Ofcom has fined TikTok £1.875 million for failing to accurately respond to a formal request for information about its parental control safety feature. In publisher news, City AM has agreed a 2-year content sharing deal with Reach to provide business and financial news for the group's newspaper titles, including the Daily Express. And finally, UK ad industry spend reached £9.2 billion in Q1 2024, a new high for the first quarter, according to the latest AA Warc report. And full year 2024 and 2025 forecasts were upgraded to 7.7% and 5.5% growth, respectively.
Thanks so much, Ella. That's all we have time for. And unfortunately, at the end here, I do actually have to sadly note that this will be your final podcast with us here at The Media Leader, as you are moving on to a new role outside at a different publication. But it's been an absolute pleasure to be doing these with you for every week for the past, I don't know how many weeks, talking about the news. And I couldn't think of a better partner to be doing it, but I will have to be moving on as well, I guess.
I'll listen from afar.
Yeah.
Right back at you.
Yeah, but really thanks so much for all your time and all your fantastic analysis and coverage for us. So
thanks, Jack. And I guess I wish goodbye to the media industry from this little studio in Covent Garden.
Thanks for listening, everyone, and we'll still see you next week.
Thanks again for listening to the Media Leader podcast. If you like what you hear, guess what? You can read our stuff at our website, themedialeader.co.uk, where you can sign up to our daily newsletter in the UK of analysis, opinion and commentary about what's going on in media and advertising. You can also find us on YouTube. We are posting video interviews and clips from our live events. And don't forget to check out our LinkedIn page, which is often a very interesting way to see what people in the industry are saying about our articles and the issues we write about. Anyway, get back to work. Catch you next time. Bye-bye.